Hi, this is Jonathan J, and welcome to this slightly different video where you will see behind the scenes of one of my podcast recordings for the Business Buying Strategies podcast. It's with an American author, Michelle Sealer Tucker, who's written a book called Exit Now, where she lays out exactly what it takes to sell your business for the maximum value. So usually my content's all about buying a business, but today you will hear and see the other side of the coin when it comes to selling a business. It's very valuable content, and I hope you enjoy it.
Michelle, tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me your background and tell me how you came to write a book all about exiting rich.
So I have been in mergers and acquisitions for a little over 20 years. I've personally sold over 500 businesses. My company that I own has sold over 1,000 deals. I used to be in franchise development, franchise sales, franchise consulting. Then I transitioned into selling companies. First, I transitioned to selling small businesses, and then very quickly started selling businesses $10 million and up. And I learned right away that what Steve Forbes says is true, that 8 out of 10 businesses don't sell. And they don't sell for a multitude of reasons. And I wrote my very first book in 2013 called Sell Your Business for More Than It's Worth. And when I did the research back then, it used to be that 85 to 95% of all startups would fail. We all know that, right? I'm not telling you anything you don't know. However, you probably don't know this. When I started, I started like just noticing all the strip centers closed and all the businesses closed. And this is way before COVID. So I said, gosh, I need to do research and write another book about all these businesses closing down and what they can do to not close down and what they can do to sell. So when I did the research again in 2019, 2020, I found out that the business landscape in America has flip flopped. So now it's only 30% of those businesses will shut down. Only 30% will close in the first 1 to 5 years. So startups are not at great risk anymore. However, those businesses, out of a sampling of 27.6 million companies, the businesses that have been in business for 10 years or longer, 70% of those businesses will go out of business. So it's flip flop. Now in America, you hear about all the big box public stories. Like you've probably heard about Toys R Us, after 70 years goes out of business and files bankruptcy, right? Kmart, Steinmart, Pier 1, Montgomery Ward's, J.C. Penney's, GNC is closing down 900 locations. Even Starbucks is in trouble. But what you're not hearing about, Jonathan, are the private companies in every street corner, in every town, in every state that are going out of business. And unfortunately, these business owners are most of them are baby boomers. So they're being forced to sell their business for pennies on the dollar, close their business, or even worse, file bankruptcy. In America, when you file bankruptcy, you typically don't just lose your business assets, but you lose your personal assets too, because most business owners commingle funds, piercing the corporate veil. So that's why I wrote Exit Rich, so I could help business owners build a sustainable, scalable, and when they're ready, a sellable business, because there's things that business owners can do to not become a statistic.
Okay, so let's talk about some of those things. What's the starting point? I mean, if I had to press you for one reason why a business owner can sell for good money, what would that one reason be?
That they've built a business with the exit in mind based upon the 6 Ps. That's what will make a business sell. That's what will create lots of buyer interest and even perhaps create a bidding war, getting them more money on the sell of their business.
Great. So the 6 Ps, what are they? Michelle, tell us.
All right. So high level, and I can go a little deep if you want me to. It's up to you. But number one is people. There are a lot of businesses in America, and I'm sure all around the world, that the business is dependent upon the owner. If the business is dependent upon the owner, like let's say you have a dental practice, but it's one dentist and dental hygienist, that business is not sellable in most cases because you pluck the owner out of the business, there is no business. So you really need to have people. You need to have the right people in the right seats. A lot of business owners have great people, but they have them in the wrong seats. And then you have to ask the who question: who opens the doors? Who handles customer service issue? Who handles manufacturing, production, logistics? Security issues, IT, the list goes on and on. The clue is you should never be next to the who. So you want to build a business. See, everybody wants to build a business, but what they keep forgetting is you don't build a business. You build people, and people build the business.
That's a good distinction. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the first P then.
That's the first P. The second P is product, which is really your industry. So you have to ask yourself, is your product, your industry on the way up or on the way out? Before COVID, there were a lot of industries that were thriving that are now dying, right? Like hospitality. And then there are industries that were dying that are thriving, like manufacturing. So you have to ask yourself, is your industry, your product on the way up or on the way out? If it's on the way out, that doesn't mean you're out of business. That just means you have to pivot. And you really have to align yourself with an expert, with a mentor, somebody who's done it before, because when you're in your fog, it's foggy. It's hard to see what's right in front of you. I always try to get my clients, if they're in a dying industry, I try to get my clients to ask themselves 3 transformational questions. Number 1, what business are you in? Number 2, what do you do really, really well? And number 3, what business should you be in? And that's where the pivot comes in. And if you look at Amazon, Amazon did this. They asked themselves, what business are we in? They said, oh, we're booksellers. What business should we be in? Oh, what do we do really well? And they said, we do fulfillment really well. What business should we be in? We should be in a fulfillment business. So
Yes.
those 3 transformational questions really took them from a bookseller to a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate that they are today. And then the third P is processes. So most owners really don't think about process until something happens, until there's a workers' comp issue. Now, all of a sudden, they want to design a process around safety, right? Or if there's a customer complaint, now they want to have a customer reassurance process. Processes should really be designed from the beginning and tweaked as you go, but should be designed with your core values, with your mission, your vision, and most importantly, with your customer experience in mind. Did you ever watch the movie The Founder?
Absolutely. Great film.
The McDonald's story, right? So
Yeah.
remember
Yeah.
the McDonald's back in the 40s? Now, the McDonald's are not the ones that grew McDonald's. Ray Kroc grew McDonald's. But back in the 40s, there were all these fast food drive-up restaurants, where people would come out in roller skates and take your order. The problem back then is the food was always cold, the order was always wrong, and it took so long. So McDonald's brothers said, we want to develop a fast food restaurant with this customer experience. We want the customers to receive great tasting food hot, 2 minutes or less. How do we do that? So then they went out to the tennis court. Do you remember that? To take all their
Mhm,
employees to
mhm.
the tennis court.
Yeah.
They wrote with
They
chalk.
drew it out, didn't they? On the
They
yeah.
drew it
Yeah.
out, and then they erased it all, and they drew it out again, and erased it all, and drew it out again, until they finally figured out who takes the customer's order, who toasts the buns, who grills the burgers, who puts the 2 pickles on the bun and gives it to the client 2 minutes or less. Those processes is why you can eat at a McDonald's in Dubai, Australia, Russia, USA, anywhere, because those processes were designed with the customer experience in mind. So many processes are designed to alienate the customer and create a terrible experience versus a wow experience. Does that make sense? So
Absolutely.
processes should be productive, efficient, and most importantly, Jonathan, they should be documented. You'd be surprised how many companies, they're operating 10, 15, $20 million in revenue, and they don't even have a PP manual, policy procedure manual. They don't have SOP checklist. So when buyers go to buy a company, if it's not clearly documented and the documentation there, then they're probably not going to go through with the purchase, or they're going to discount because it's going to take money and time to document those processes. So it's very big. The fourth P, do you have any questions so far?
No, very clear. Great stuff.
The fourth P is proprietary. So this is the highest value driver. And when you're looking at buying businesses, because I know you said a lot of your listeners are acquirers, right? You need to really look at all this stuff when you're acquiring a business. You want to make sure they have people in place. You want to make sure you're buying a business, not a job. You want to make sure the product is on the way up and not the way out. And you want to make sure processes are well defined. Also, you want to make sure proprietary is there. So proprietary gets you the highest multiple. Now, what's a multiple? A multiple is 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. That's how we figure it in the US. I'm not sure about Dubai.
That is exactly the same. Yes.
Exactly the same. Okay. So
Yeah.
it's a multiple of EBITDA. And the highest driver of multiple is proprietary. So that's the fourth P. And there's 6 pillars to proprietary. Number 1 is branding. The more well branded your business is, the more money I can sell your company for, as long as your brand is relevant in the mind of the consumer. Meaning nobody wants to pay for Blockbuster, right? Because they went bust. So branding is huge. Like the biggest brand in the world right now is Apple, worth $189 billion. That's not including assets, inventory, real estate, cash flow, EBITDA, or anything else, just the brand alone. Also, the big value driver is trademarks. So, a lot of businesses in the United States, when they start a business or buy a business, they don't check this. All your acquirers should check this. In the US, they go get a state trademark. So if they're opening up a business in California, they go register with the state of California. But they never check the federal database to make sure that that name is available. So they could be operating for 5 or 10 years and somebody else goes snag that name. And all of a sudden they receive a cease and desist letter in the mail and they have to stop using that name. So you need, if you have a podcast, trademark the name. If you have a book, trademark it. Like I trademarked Exit Rich, you know, trademark your slogans, trademark anything that's a USP, unique selling proposition to you and your company. Then the other thing that's valuable is patents. So anytime you have a product, make sure you patent it. You know, a lot of people are saying, oh, patents are not that important. Yes, they are. Have you ever watched the movie Shark Tank?
Of course.
And
Yes.
what do they always ask?
Well, is it patented?
Do you have a patent? Do you have a patent? Do you
Yeah.
have a patent? We sold a business for $18 million because they had 18 patents, but they weren't making any money. So we got $1 million of patent. So patents are very valuable. And then contracts are also very valuable. So if you have any manufacturing contracts, vendor contracts, distributor contracts, let's say you're a franchisor and you have franchisee contracts. Let's say you have an acquirer that's acquiring a franchisor. Very valuable. Number one thing, though, is make sure the contracts are transferable. Client contracts are the most valuable of all contracts. You have a landscape company, let's say you have 300 commercial contracts. Buyers want to buy a business that has recurring revenue and that has a WIP, which is work in progress, and has cash flow coming in, right? So contracts are very valuable. But in the USA, the biggest mistake that all business owners make is they don't have the transferability clause. And 99.9% of all sales are asset sales, not stock sales. So your contracts are not going to just automatically transfer. So you have to have those two sentences. And I will tell you, nobody has it. I've been doing this 20 years, thousands of transactions. Nobody has it.
Yeah, which
So
from a buyer's perspective allows you to negotiate the price downwards quite dramatically. I mean, I see this a lot in digital marketing businesses where the clients are on just 30-day rolling contracts. So in theory, every single client could cancel the day of completion, you know, the
right.
day after completion. So it really demolishes the value. So I guess if you're looking at from the sell side, if you put everyone on 12-month contracts, it's got to increase your value dramatically.
Correct. As long as it's transferable.
Yeah,
But in the situation that you just gave, one way to get around that from a buyer's perspective, yes, you can reduce the price, but you can also tie it to an earn out. And you
absolutely.
can set those
Yeah.
benchmarks and say, okay, you get this benchmark, you get this or not. Because yeah, you're right. They could all cancel. I had a franchisor once sell their business and none of the franchise, they have 1,500 franchisees and the franchisor, the buyer didn't do their due diligence. None of the franchise agreements were transferable. The buyer's whole team did not do their due diligence. The company ended up filing bankruptcy and ended up suing their whole legal team. So, and I think they won. So you got to make sure there's transferable contracts. The other thing that's very valuable is databases. So if you have a lot of clients, especially in SaaS businesses, e-commerce businesses, if you have a lot of clients and they can be repurposed and retargeted, there are strategic buyers that will pay a lot of money for that. Facebook paid $19 billion for WhatsApp, and WhatsApp was hemorrhaging. So you can lose money in your company and actually sell it for millions or billions as long as you have one of these synergies that we're talking about. The other big synergy is what I talk about is IP real estate. IP real estate is not your building or your land. IP real estate is, let's say that you have a diet company And Glenn Beck is a big, famous radio talk show host here, TV talk show host. Let's say he's endorsing your product. Well, that's a celebrity endorsement. Let's say you have a skincare line and Oprah Winfrey is endorsing it. That's a celebrity endorsement. Strategics will pay a lot of money for celebrity endorsements. Let's say you manufacture bedding and you're number one on Wayfair. Again, that's IP real estate that a strategic will pay a lot of money for because it's hard to get that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So those are the highest multiple drivers that you can possibly get is those things in IP. So the fifth P is patrons, and that's your customer base. And in America, most businesses follow the 80-20 rule. And the only reason I keep saying America, because that's what most of what I know. So they follow the 80-20 rule where 80% of their business comes from 20% of their clients. And if you lose a couple of clients, Jonathan, you could be out of business. So you want to make sure you have customer diversification, not customer concentration. And then there's a lot of businesses that are aging out. And their clients are aging out. So if you've been in business for 30 years, you got to start replacing some of your clients. And if your clients are baby boomers, the way you sell to Gen X or the way you sell to millennials is going to be completely different because millennials don't care about what baby boomers cared about, So buying habits are very different. And then the last P, the most important P to all of us entrepreneurs is profits. We want to buy a business that's making money, but profits is never the problem. It's always the symptom of not operating on one of the other 5 Ps. Like I have clients that come to me and say, Michelle, I have a profit problem. I'm like, no, you have a people problem. You don't have the right people. Or no, you have a process problem. Your lack of processes is costing you this much money. We once were selling a plastics manufacturing company, and the lady was from China, and she had everybody working there that was from China as well. But she kept giving him raises, and they've been with her 30, 40, 50 years. The problem is she kept raising the labor costs so much that she's in the plastics business, plastics packaging. It's a very tight profit margin, and it's extremely competitive. They don't buy based upon loyalty, they buy based upon price. So she raised the ceiling on what she was paying her employees, but never added congruent revenue streams to support such. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So she was losing money like crazy because she was overpaying her people. Okay. So profits is never the problem. It's always a symptom.
Symptom of something else. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. So those are our 6.
Those are 6 Ps.
6 Ps.
Yeah. And then I say my 7 P would be pivot. And my 8th P would be passion. Months. What's that?
Well, pivoting has become more relevant recently because otherwise you're just going to go out of business if you still do it the pre-COVID way.
Yeah. And, like I said, I mean, pre-COVID, the business landscape in America has changed so dramatically that 70% of businesses are going out of business. And most people didn't know because they don't talk about that in the media. And that was before COVID. We have 10,000 restaurants going to close in the next 30 days, if not more than 10,000. Yeah. So that's all pre-COVID numbers. So business owners have to pivot,
Do you see an opportunity then for the savvy business buyer?
Mm-hmm. I sure do. I see lots of opportunities. There's 5 different types of buyers. And one of the buyers that we talk about in my book, Exit Rich, is a turnaround specialist. So if anybody is or wants to be a turnaround specialist, this is a gold mine for you right now. There are so many businesses that you can come in and buy and leverage the assets of the company to purchase that business and maybe buy a business with no money out of pocket.
That's very interesting. You should say that because I get into debates on LinkedIn with people who have opposing opinions to myself. And I help people buy businesses without investing large amounts of their own capital by, you just said, leveraging the assets, using earnouts, these methods of allowing
seller financing.
Exactly, allowing the business to buy itself, effectively pay for itself. What are your feelings about that from representing sellers?
Well, from a seller standpoint, they don't want that, right? From a seller standpoint,
everyone wants a check, right?
Everybody wants a big fat check.
Yeah.
But so it depends upon the business. It depends upon what type of business we're talking about. Because if we're talking about businesses that are doing well, that have a high EBIT of over a million, you're not going to use the assets to buy the company. They're going to want a big check, and they're going to get a big check because private equity groups have money, strategics have money, competitors have money. There are more buyers for good businesses than there are good businesses to buy. Okay.
So there's a demand there,
There's a
and
demand
therefore
there.
that in itself increases the price.
There's demand for businesses over $1 million in EBITDA that have the people in place, that have the right product, that have the processes, that have all the IP. There's a huge demand. Like I said, there's more buyers. We create bidding wars all the time. I mean, there's nothing for us to bring like 500 buyers to one deal. Now, granted, we don't wear the client out; we wear ourselves out. but and then we narrow it down to like 5 to 10 LOIs, and because there's a huge demand for businesses with over $1 million in EBITDA. However, there's that spot under $1 million in EBITDA where turnaround specialist or anybody that wants to buy businesses and really grow through acquisitions. There's a huge opportunity right now. There's so many businesses that an investor could buy using the assets of their business. I mean, there's people who teach classes here in the United States on how to do that, but I know how to do it. But it's not hard. You just got to find the right buyer. You got to find, I mean, the right seller. You got to find the right deal. And right now, there's so many business owners suffering because of COVID that it's really an investor's dream because there are so many opportunities. Like, let's say you wanted to own a bunch of restaurants. Go, guess what? You could acquire a whole bunch of restaurants right now and make a huge brand for yourself. And there's all kinds of other industries that you could acquire. But I think it depends upon what the buyer's trying to accomplish and what the seller's trying to accomplish. If the seller just can't hold on anymore and the seller has to get out of debt, or if the seller has a debilitating disease, or if there's a divorce, it just really depends upon what the situation is, which will dictate, how flexible that seller is going to be.
Yeah, so it's the motivation of the seller. And I
Right.
suppose from your perspective or your company's perspective, representing sellers, the last thing you want your client to do is to reveal to the buyer their personal motivations, because that shows the weakness perhaps in their negotiating position.
Actually, no, I'm a little bit different. I'm all about transparency.
Okay.
And one of the number one things that buyers always want to know is, if this is such a great business, then why is the seller selling it? That's the number one question they want to know. And look, life happens, right? There's divorce, there's partner disputes, there's health issues. I once had a client that was diagnosed with prostate cancer and really thought he was going to die. He ended up living. We sold his business. He took the proceeds and went to a clinic in California and ended up, beating prostate cancer, which was great. But I'm okay. I would prefer, see, that's what they tell you to do in real estate when somebody's selling a house. Well, selling a business is very different than selling a house. I would rather my clients be transparent of what their really reasons are that they're selling. And I'm the one that does the negotiations, not them. And I guarantee you, I'm always going to have backup buyers. So if one buyer falls apart, I'll bring you another one.
Yeah, well, I think that's great. And it's actually quite refreshing to hear that, because I guess it's the same in every country in the world. You get different standards of broker and intermediary. Some are just sort of not that great, and some are superbly professional, like yourself, like what you've been describing.
Right. And I've been doing this, like I said, 20 years, over 1,000 transactions. And, I just feel like, you got the good, the ugly, right? I feel like when we give prospectuses out to our buyers, we tell them the hair on every deal, because every deal has hair on it. So we come right out and tell them, here's the skeletons in the closet. Here's the hair on this deal. Here's what the issues are. Here's how we get past them. Here's what's going on with my client. And are fully transparent, because when we're transparent like that, then the buyers are more comfortable, and we do a lot of our due diligence up front. But I never believe in hiding anything. If you hide something, it's going to come out, and then
It's always going to be
they're
found.
just going to fall apart, because now the buyer doesn't trust. And when the buyer doesn't trust, and you've lost trust, you've lost a deal.
Yeah, the later it's found, the more likely you're going to either lose the deal or be slammed on the price.
Right.
Because this is discovered 2 weeks before closing. You're not in a very good position to walk away at that point.
Right. So we tell everything up front. Now, I will tell you, there have been times the sellers have not been transparent with us. There's been different things where sellers didn't tell us. But we always tell us the good, the bad, the ugly. We want to know it all because we want to be transparent and we want to point it out from the beginning because they're going to find out. I mean, their legal teams will find out. There's nothing you can hide.
Yeah. So we were chatting before I hit the record button on this podcast about your book and an exceptional offer that you are making. And I think it probably would come best from you about what that involves and how people who listen to this podcast can avail themselves of the opportunity you have for them.
Sure. So I want to tell a little bit about the book. Sharon Lechter is my co-author who wrote Rich Dad Poor Dad with Robert Kiyosaki. Have you ever read that book?
Of course. Yes.
So she's a five-time New York best-selling author. Plus, she's written several books in the Napoleon Hill Foundation. And what makes her so unique to write this book with me is she's a CPA. I'm not a CPA. She's a CPA. She's a financial literacy expert. She has been the advisor to many different presidents. And her husband is an IP attorney, intellectual property attorney. So I wrote the book based upon my 20 years in the trenches. And she sprinkles what she calls the mentor's corner at the end of every chapter. And her husband's added some feedback too, especially when we talk about proprietary. So it really makes for a good read because it's not just my perspective. You get to read my perspective, her husband's perspective. And then the book was endorsed by Steve Forbes, which is pretty good, and so we have lots of testimonials from like Les Brown, Tom Hopkins, Brian Tracy, all of those guys. But they can get the book right now. We're in the middle of pre-sale, so they can go to exitrichbook.com. You can buy it on Amazon. But if you go to exitrichbook.com, we will email you. First of all, it's less expensive there. It's $24.79. If you're in the United States, we'll email you the digital download and we'll ship you the hardcover to your doorstep. If you're outside the United States, we'll email you the digital copy right away. And then when the Kindle gets released, we'll email you that as well. So you have two. And you can start reading it now. Plus, you get a lifetime membership into Exit Rich Book Club. And that's me doing video training with different, techniques that we've been talking about, the 6 Ps, the GPS exit, 5 types of buyers, how to negotiate, how to evaluate businesses, how to normalize your financials. Plus, most importantly, all the documents that you need to run and sell a business are there. Because a lot of clients will ask me, Michelle, I've never seen an organizational chart before. I've never seen an employee handbook. I don't even know what SOP looks like. Or what does a due diligence checklist look like? What's a sample purchase agreement, sample LOI, letter of intent? We even have sample closing docs. So you can review and download these documents free of charge, and we add documentation to it all the time. Plus, I will receive a 30-day membership in the Club CEOs, which is a like-minded entrepreneurial club that we started just to, help people get past this pandemic and survive, but come on the other side of this and really thrive. And that's in the Club CEOs.
Fantastic. So let's hear that web address again.
So that's Exit Rich Book. They got to make sure they put book because everybody's going to exitrich.com. They got to go to exitrichbook.com.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. I'll go and grab one myself. It sounds like a great book. And
Thank you.
Michelle, you've been a great guest. Thank you very much indeed. And good luck with the book launch.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Jonathan. It's been a pleasure.